We have amazing speakers with us this morning. I hope everybody brought their coffee. I have this beautiful mug that was gifted to me, and I will get one to our speakers to enjoy at home as well. But I'm going to hand the conversation over to my co-host this morning, Ana Padron-Sikora, who is mental health professional in the Berwyn area, surrounding area, and I'm so excited to have her with me today. Anna will help coordinate the conversation as I monitor the questions that are coming through our Facebook chat. So Anna, if I can hand it over to you.
Hi, good morning. I wanted to first start by thanking everybody for joining us. We know it's bright and early on a cold Saturday morning, but this is such an important topic and we have such so many things to learn from this discussion. So thank you for joining us. What I like to do is start by having each of our speakers introduce themselves and talk a little bit about the work that they do around children and youth in the community. And then from there, we have specific questions to kind of lead the discussion. So that please go ahead and like Erica said, let's make this interactive and have questions go into the chat. Erica will be monitoring those, and then also as we're building off of each other. So please, as other speakers feel that there's something important to add, let's chime in and have this be fluid and fun and educational. So I'm going to go ahead and start with Jackie. So if you could tell us a little bit about yourself and how how you work in community.
Sure. My name is Jackie Wallen. I'm the Associate Director of Counseling Services at Youth Crossroads. I have been at Youth Crossroads for over 10 years now. I'm a resident of Cicero and have lived there for over 14, I think. I'm a mother to two amazing kiddos. Justice is 8 and Deacon is 6. In my work at Youth Crossroads, I oversee our school-based counseling programs at Morton West High School and Morton Freshman Center in Cicero. I also oversee our crisis counseling program that deals with runaway and locked out youth. And I am super excited to be here. So thanks so much for having me.
Well, thank you. I think from there, we'll go right over to Lori Weiss.
Hi, I'm Dr. Lori Weiss. I am a practicing pediatrician in Berwyn. I have been practicing for about 30 years and I've been in Berwyn for about 20 years. I see children of all ages from birth until they turn 19. I figure that gets them launched into the next stage of their life, whether it's college, work, the military, or whatever the next stage of life is. And I enjoy seeing children of all different ages and stages.
Awesome, thank you so much. So happy you're here. Let's go over to Tracy.
Good morning, my name is Tracy Patton. I am a child development specialist. I supervise a birth to 5 home visiting program with the Children's Center of Cicero Berwyn. I've been with them 10 years, and in the 11 years before that, I was an infant toddler teacher. I also consult on the side through my company, Once Upon Some Messy Fun, and I do professional development and parent education classes. I lived in Berwyn for many years. I now live out in the burbs because my kids are out. One is a special ed major, following in my footsteps, and the other just graduated and is working in the city. So I like being around the little ones and parents who are trying to figure it out. They're hard years, and everybody does better when we support each other.
Thank you, Tracy, and you are so right. Thank you so much for that. Let's go over to Mike.
Hello, good morning. Name is Mike Torres. I am a youth worker in the Little Village neighborhood in Chicago, so not too far from Berwyn. Lifelong resident in Little Village. I continue working here. I've been working with youth for a couple of decades now, since I was in high school, working with K through 12. at New Life Centers in the Little Village neighborhood, and some post high school. At different capacities, we have after school programming where it may involve either sports programming, tutoring, just spending time with youth, walking alongside them. We also have some in-school programming before the pandemic hit, and we still try to work with some of those in-school youth outside of the school, outside of the school session, right? So after school, we provide sports programming, a variety of sports, but working with youth and at different capacities. We have an outreach program, and also more recently a pantry that has kind of grown throughout this pandemic.
Thank you, Mike, for being here. And yes, we'll talk more about how the services and the needs that we were doing pre-pandemic, how some of those have had to pivot as we continue to navigate this pandemic with children and families. So I'm looking forward to hearing more about those. And I know all of us have had to kind of adjust how we deliver services and the impact, right, that the pandemic is having on our communities and on our families. So, but last but not least, Ms. Gonzalez, can you introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Dr. Salali Gonzalez. I'm a clinical psychologist and I work with United Stand, which is a nonprofit in the city of Chicago. We partner with Catholic schools all over the city and suburbs, and we provide therapy services, academic coaching, and also psychological and psychoeducational evaluations at low or no cost to families. We also do lots of groups, preventative services, lots of different programming for students and their families. And my schools are in Little Village. I'm at Our Lady of Tepeyac High School. I specialize in adolescent mental health and spent the beginning of my career specializing in autism spectrum disorders. And I'm also a mom and a resident of Berwyn. I have a 5-year-old and a 1.5-year-old.
Awesome, thank you. I feel like the folks listening might not even have known that we have such specialties within our community, and that I'm excited to get started into some of the discussion. So just a quick introduction. So my name is Ana Padron Sakura, and I do work at Pillars Community Health. It's a community mental health agency that merged with a federal qualified health center. And so those are kind of our main umbrella. In addition to, we work with domestic violence and sexual assault. And so all of our resources will be included at the end. And so today, Erica really just asked me to help lead some of this discussion as we think about child development from early childhood all the way through adolescence, as Dr. Weiss mentioned, and kind of all the different milestones that go on like in a normal year. And here we are in the pandemic, and how do we think about how our kids are developing and how we're developing as parents during the pandemic. So I'll go ahead and start with Dr. Weiss. We've been thinking a lot about how the pandemic has affected our mental and physical health and on ourselves, but how have you seen it played out with our children and the children that you see?
I would say that since March, since the lockdown began, there's been a huge impact on children of all ages, because what was previously normal is not normal. And even though we're calling it the new normal, it's still not normal. Kids are not back in school, parents are working at home, children's routines are disrupted. And I think that this plays a role no matter what the age of the child. Children feed off of their parents. If you have parents that are worried because of economic insecurity, if they're worried because they can't put food on their table, they're worried about losing their house or apartment, they're worried about losing their job, their boss isn't giving them off of work enough time because of a COVID exposure. And we can talk about that more later, what it means isolation versus quarantine, because there are different lengths of time that parents need to be home in order to be with their children. And some workplaces are only allotting a certain amount of time and not taking into account the other But if I think I had to summarize it, I thought about this last night a little bit. I would really call it lack of routine. And I'm going to make that a really big global thing. And I kind of like alliteration and using sounds. And I came up with S. And I'm going to name a bunch of words and then maybe touch on each of these a little bit. So I was thinking of all the words that started with S that have been disrupted for families of all ages, children and adults, due to COVID, and it may be due to other things as well. But there are problems with sleep, problems with school, problems with socialization, problems with screen time, issues related, I'm calling it sun, but not getting enough exercise or physical activity in some way, shape, or form. Sickness, be it within the patient, the family, or somebody else within their broader family or community who's either been sick with COVID or died from COVID, and sadness in general, and we could go into depression. As a general pediatrician, I would say probably at least 50% of my patient base has a mental health diagnosis, and this was pre-COVID. And I'm just saying this anecdotally, ranging from, kids with ADHD, depression, anxiety, family disruption with a divorce, grief, and autism spectrum as well. Add to it COVID, and it's escalated, and every single week, so many kids come into my office. I'm not doing well at school, particularly with pre-adolescents and adolescents. I can't concentrate. I hate e-learning. Their grades are failing. Their parents are trying to work at home and support 3 different kids of 3 different ages who need help with their learning. Maybe kids are differently abled as far as their learning capacity, and they need more one-on-one, but the parents trying to divide their time between 3 kids and all of that. So I think that's wreaked havoc on a lot of kids. Sleep, I'm just going to touch briefly on all those S's. Sleep has been disrupted for a lot of kids. Kids are having trouble falling asleep. Kids are having trouble staying asleep. Kids are going to bed late and then being late for school, even though school is in their bedroom. And that sort of thing, or maybe they're not getting breakfast that they would have routinely have gotten at school. So some of them are hungry, and it's hard to learn when you're hungry. Some of them, particularly with pre-adolescents and adolescents, are up very late at night on their little cellular devices, and the blue lights in these keep all of these kids up. So every day I'm having discussions with families about turning off your screens about 45 minutes to an hour before bedtime. Sometimes I use apps like Calm or Headspace, which are actually good ones, and they have sleep stories and good centering meditations and stuff, like the brief ones, even for a minute or 2, but sleep stories to help some kids fall asleep. So sometimes that's needed for some kids. As far as schooling, I think there's some questions later about hybrid schooling that someone else may touch on, but you've got kids with varying routines. Some kids are going to school a couple days a week. Some kids are going to school at home. Some kids are fully in school. It's hard for parents who work. Kids learn better, I think, when they're face-to-face with a teacher, and this remote learning and the technology aspect has been hard for a lot of kids. And I think grades have suffered, and I have some concerns about what's going to happen in the next academic year, because you're going to have such a scatter of kids of different learning abilities and how far they've progressed in this past year during COVID. Socialization is huge. Kids by nature are social animals. Toddlers in daycare, they learn from other kids. They don't just learn from older brothers or sisters or cousins. They need to be with other children. And when you get into school age kids and preteens and teens, they talk to their friends, they learn from their friends. Kids do not pick up a telephone and say, "Hi, how are you today?" They're on their phones, they're texting, they're using Snapchat, they're, posting things on Instagram and this and that. If they don't have access to a cell phone, it's a problem. If they can't, because of the COVID restrictions, they haven't seen their friends, but I think there are some safe ways to maybe go for some walks, wearing your mask with a friend, to be able to have some outside social contact. Obviously, that's harder in the winter right now, and I'm not at all advocating for inside social contact between families. I'm not saying that. As I mentioned, I touched upon it before, screen time. The American Academy of Pediatrics really recommends no screen time for kids who are less than 2 years of age. And for kids who are getting older, school age and older, I think the recommendation is about 2 hours a day of recreational screen time. I'm not talking about school time on an iPad or a computer. And many of my kids are spending 4, 6, 8 hours a day gaming, It's having effects on their sleep. It's having effects on their nutrition. It's having effect. That's where they're getting their socialization because they're gaming with their friends, but they're not participating in their families. And it's hard for the families to put the brakes on it. In fact, the New York Times had an article that I actually posted on our Work Primary Care Associate Facebook site this week about what is this, excess screen time doing to families and doing to teenagers in particular. So check that out. I'm sure you can find that article online. Sun and exercise. Every kid needs about an hour of exercise a day, and it can be broken down into small things, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes. It doesn't have to be thinking about an hour of going to the gym. And many families, you're in a small house or an apartment, you're not going to school, you're not walking to school, you're not walking from the bus into the school, you're not going to stores and walking from the parking lot into the market, or whatnot. And, kids need to be outside. People get energized from seeing the sun, and movement is good. So I think there are lots of ways that families can incorporate exercise into a routine of being home, be it just bundling up and putting on a coat, unless it's raining or it's icy, you can put on a coat and hat and boots and go take a walk, some warm gear, and go take a walk outside for 15 minutes. It's amazing how invigorated you feel after that. There are a lot of things on YouTube that are free. Cosmic Kids Yoga is a great one. For younger kids, I do yoga. It's fun, it's centering, it's good stretching. You can get good cardio out of it, and it's cheap. All you need is a mat, or even you could do it with a towel. There are kids cardio workouts on YouTube that are also free, and ranging from 5 to 10 minute workouts that I think kids just need to move. And I oftentimes give kids a suggestion: if you have a little break between your classes, get up, go to the restroom if you need to, go get a sip of water and do 5 push-ups or 5 crunches or 5 jumping jacks, just something to get the blood going. Your body needs to move. And I can't stress that enough. Also for the parents, the parents will have more energy to care for their children if they are getting some exercise and they're physically fit too. And it'll be something, I think most importantly, it's something that's fun for the parent to do with the child one-on-one. It's not looking at a screen for work or doing a chore around the house and that sort of thing. 2 other things, and then I'll turn this over to the next person. Sickness. I think so many people have been sick this year. I can't think of anybody that I know that hasn't been touched by COVID. They know a relative who's had COVID. They've had a sibling who's had COVID, a parent, a grandparent. They've had losses. I think we have to be cognizant in realizing these losses and the hurt that families have had, and try and help support them in any way we can with this. It is safe to go to doctor's offices. I want to stress that. Our office did major revisions. We haven't had any sick patients in the well part of our office since mid-March of 2020. We quickly adapted within 1 weekend to telemedicine. We have built out a sick bay in the back of our office, so patients who are sick come in a backdoor entrance. The interview part of the visit is done on a cell phone, and then they're either seen in their cars or in the back part of our office where it's safe, where we have HEPA filters, where we're all geared up from head to toe. And I think it's important for patients to know children need their regular health care. They need to go to the doctor. They need their immunizations. You need to talk to them about growth and development, basic pediatric things that day in and day out are so important for nurturing your child. And the doctor's office is safe. And I'm sure most, all other doctor's offices have taken care to make their offices safe space for patients with whatever their medical concerns are. So please call your doctors and make sure your kids are getting their regular health care, their regular dental care, their regular eye care, all of the routine things that they normally need. And then lastly, sadness, which I think some of the mental health specialists on this panel will deal with, but there is a lot of depression and anxiety in young kids, school-age kids, and obviously adolescents too. Increased need for therapy, increased for family support, increased need for medication management for some children. And I think we all just have to have our tentacles up to just ask the right questions, because somebody may come in for a sprained ankle and I ask a question and all of a sudden it's just tears. And thank God for telemedicine, because that has been my gift for mental health. I am doing so many telemedicine visits for mental health things, and I get a much better picture of the teen. I could spend much longer period of time. They can show me cool things in their room. I get a better picture of what's going on at home, and I can watch their body language better. It's so much better than a brief visit in the office. So I think we all just need to, have our vision up, to look and really be on the lookout for mental health issues in children of all ages and stages, because it's so important. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Weiss. So many important information that you shared with us. I mean, I think that's so many of us on this panel and in the community have seen, and you've done such a beautiful job verbalizing all the different the different S's that we have also seen. So thank you for sharing that.
Anna, could I just briefly translate? I can't translate it, the whole conversation. But I do want to touch on the S's, translate them in Spanish. So la pregunta fue, ¿cómo es que nuestros hijos están afectados más mentalmente, más físicamente? ¿Qué son las indicaciones que tenemos que ver en nuestros hijos? Lo que la doctora acaba de decir es de que tenemos que ver que las disrupciones han sido algunas de estas. Dormir, ha sido la escuela, ha sido la socialización, ha sido el sol. Nuestros hijos tienen que estar afuera, tienen que ver el sol, tienen que recibir esa vitamina D. Y también enfermedad. Nuestros hijos han estado afectados por personas en su familia, amigos, otras personas que han estado enfermos o enfermos ellos también ellos mismos. La siguiente es tristeza. Nuestros hijos han visto la tristeza en los padres o en ellos mismos. Y esas fueron las 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Fueron 6 S's. How many S's were there, Lori?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
Okay, las 7.
Sleep, yeah.
Sí, las
Sleep.
7 S's que quería la doctora dejarles saber a las familias, que tienen que ver que nuestros hijos han sido afectados en cada una de esas áreas. So that was a brief recap. And I'll hand it over to you.
Yes, and I love to kind of build on that and those different comments that you made. So maybe Dr. Gonzalez, if you can talk about, we mentioned about how the education system has been turned upside down this year, and we continue to navigate, how Dr. Weiss said, the different forms of learning, from remote learning to hybrid and kind of everything in between. And so the support that children typically receive in a school setting has shifted. So the milestones children were due to hit have changed during the pandemic. How much grace should parents give their children and themselves during this time?
So I'm going to answer this as a two-part question. I work in school, so I've seen a little bit of the school thing, and I saw it it looked different at the beginning than it does now. In my schools at the beginning, it was, I think as in most schools, kind of a mess. We didn't know what we were doing. All of a sudden, we didn't have enough computers. We didn't have really a good blueprint of how to do e-learning. Our kids didn't have that self-discipline to really get online and do their e-learning. And so it was a bit of a learning curve, I think, for everybody, for students as well as teachers. And we saw that a lot of the extra supports we had, so not just the teaching, but all the tutors we had, all the coaching, all the extras were all of a sudden taken away. And the students really, really missed that. And I think it really showed us how important those services are, which I think is really key, because a lot of times those extra supports get kind of ignored. And we talk a lot about the learning that students do in the classroom, but those extras, the speech, the OT, the psychologist, the counseling, all of that other stuff gets kind of pushed aside, and we forget about it. And getting it taken away, all of a sudden, we saw how important it was. And so it's important to keep that in mind, because now that, okay, we're looking at coming back to school, let's keep that in mind so that we can make sure that we fund those, that we look into those, that we advocate for those, and that we have a push to make sure that these are included for our kids. So that's that part. Within my schools, because I work in Catholic schools, the kids have been in person this year, And so they are able to access in-person services, but a lot of the services are still remote. So my service, I'm working remotely. So I am able to see the kids, but we are doing telehealth, and it's nice. You know, the kids, I work with teens, so they're able to access telehealth. They know how to use a computer. They're really great. They'll show me their rooms. They'll show me things for those that are still remote. They'll show me things in their classroom, and they've been really, really wonderful. They'll type things into the chat that they don't want to say out loud, which is actually really cool. And it's allowed us to access therapy kind of on a different level. Now, as far as the second part of the question, so grace has actually been my theme, was my theme of 2020, and it's rolling into my theme of 2021. Have grace. That's been my theme, because I think that a lot of times as parents, as adults, we tend to be kind of hard on ourselves and maybe focus in on our mistakes. And I think it's so important to have grace and not focus in on that one little thing that went wrong with ourselves as well as with our children. So taking a look at how kids are doing in school, now that we're able to see them with e-learning, we're able to see them, you know, kind of losing focus, looking around, and there's that temptation to say, hey, pay attention. We need to have grace, because in the classroom, they would be looking around too. Have a little grace, let them look around for a minute, let them regulate, and then come back and pay attention. Have grace too, and I think it's really important to keep an eye on the bigger picture. So what is the goal for the year? What is the goal for the semester? What is the goal for the class? And it's not always the goal is to make sure they get all the spelling words right, and that is going to be my focus. The goal may not be they must have their name written on every assignment correctly, or they must have all the questions answered or finish every single question. The goal might be a little bit different for maybe the little guys, the little preschoolers early. It might be the goal is to learn to engage with the teacher. The goal might be to connect with the other students, to learn to like being in a school setting, or learn to like being with the classroom setting, even if they're not inside the school. And so if we're able to keep an eye on the bigger picture, we're able to have grace with maybe the kind of walking away from the screen, or maybe not really getting all of the assignment. Not every child will get every assignment, but we're able to kind of focus in more on learning to love learning, learning to engage with teachers, engage with classmates, and we're able then to acknowledge mistakes and accept mistakes and accept learning, which is, you know, a broader process. So I think having grace is so important, kind of accepting too that milestones happen, you know, differently for each child. So not every child is going to learn at the same rate as other children. So I think we also have to have grace and not engage in too much competitive parenting and, you know, see, well, what else is everyone else doing? And he should be doing this too.
I've totally been there, Sitlali, and I've talked to you. We both have children the same age, and I've talked to Sitlali about, Liam didn't hit that milestone. What am I supposed to do? And, you know, this was pre-pandemic, and now even more so in the middle of the pandemic, when my child spent more time being, you know, not shut in during the shutdown with us. I'm like, well, he's not socializing with anybody except his brother and I. How is he gonna, he's not saying the words he's supposed to. He's not hitting those ages and stages, you know, piece. We are so hard on ourselves as parents, and we gotta ease up.
We need to step back. And I've done it too. I do it too. And I actually have a document on my phone where I'm tracking his words, because at one point I was like, oh my gosh, why is so-and-so's kid saying sentences? Marcos only has a handful of words. But then I took a step back and I'm like, you know what? He's 19 months and he's going to catch up, and he's going to say more words later, or we will get him some help and he will eventually learn to speak. And I also am acknowledging and having grace with myself and with him, and realizing he's not exposed to as much language as he would be otherwise, because we're in a pandemic. He's not in daycare. He's not hanging out with other little kids, and expecting him to be developing at the rate he might otherwise be is not realistic. His language exposure is my family, and it's not the same, you know, for now, but it will be later. So I just have to kind of take a step back and realize, hey, it's gonna be okay. It's a little bit weird right now. It's not normal right now, but we're going to get there. We're going to get there later.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, and I think that for all of us who work with kiddos, we realize that so much of the work and the support is with the parents, right? And that the more that we could support parents and help with the stress and help with the anxiety that parents feel, and again, pre-pandemic and certainly during the pandemic, I think that's how that has the most impact on that child's physical health and mental health. And so, you know, everybody's already mentioned that, but I wanted to highlight that because I think that the healthier we are as parents and the more support that we have through our own networks, then that's really how that has the biggest positive impact on our kids. Tracy, do you, and I feel like,
I do.
I see you jumping through the screen.
Like, that was
please.
a really nice segue.
Yeah.
So I'm watching the feed on Facebook, and someone just made a comment, thank you, Sandra, that said, I'd like to think that kids are not falling behind, they are surviving a pandemic. And if I could applaud you, I would. I think all parents of any age child right now need to take a deep collective breath, because they're not falling behind, because everybody's in the same boat with them. We just kind of hit pause. No, you know, yes, there are some districts that are doing a better job. Yes, there are some districts that weren't able to provide devices, but the children are all in this holding pattern. So it's not like they're just falling behind. The entire world is in a holding pattern right now. Colleges are making accommodations for not doing standardized tests for admission. Everybody is there. And for us, so I work with 0 to 8 is early childhood, but 0 to 5 specifically. You know, our concern is those kids that are normally entering preschool classrooms to get used to a classroom routine before they hit kindergarten are now not, right? Next year, they're going to go pretty much from their homes to a classroom. And our classrooms are open, but some parents are hesitant to send them. And so in my work with the Children's Center of Cicero Berwyn, I supervise a home visiting program. And of course, nobody's going into homes and visiting right now. It's all virtual. But we do the ages and stages questionnaires to make sure that basic milestones are being hit. And for Dr. Gonzalez, the milestone is 50 words by their 2nd birthday. So take a breath, breathe. There's a wonderful, I'm going to share this because we share it with every family we have. There's a wonderful free app called the CDC Milestone Tracker. It's fully bilingual in English and Spanish. And you can put your child's birthday in, and it will give you activities to do, areas in different domains. And it will also give you little questions on when to be concerned and ask for help. So that's a really nice piece to help parents calm down. But it is, every child is different, right? One child is speaking at 18 months in sentences, and the next child only has a handful of words until age 2. And so our big focus right now is making sure that children are getting early intervention if they need it, because that only goes until their 3rd birthday. More importantly, it's to support the parents. This is an incredibly, to take one of the S words, stressful time for parents. And what we're seeing now is that there is a shift between caregiving and nurturing, right? Kids are getting fed, and we have supports for that if food is tight. They have shelter, they have clothing, they have their basic needs met. But because the parents are juggling multiple children remote learning, or also working at home, or are stressed because they've lost their jobs, that nurturing piece, that playing one-on-one with a child in the morning after breakfast, that sitting and reading a story to the child, those extra pieces, those conversations about, oh, what a beautiful picture, tell me what you drew. That extra piece is what's suffering so much in many cases. And so through our program and through the parent education stuff that we do, that is really our focus, is how to stay engaged. You know, Zoom calls with family members that you can't see. There is absolutely a grief piece. I work as a volunteer with Buddy's Place, which is a grief facilitation program for children through Pillars. And, you know, those services are virtual now too. We know in Cicero, and I'm sure in Berwyn, that so many families are coming back to school next year, having lost someone and did not get to say goodbye, did not get to go to a funeral and have that closure piece. And so we need to create opportunities for grace and time for that also, because that will impact the ability to learn, that will impact the ability to take in new information. One of the things that I'm working on right now is a new parent education series for school readiness. And this was an issue long before the COVID pandemic. Children in the Berwyn and Cicero area, according to Illinois State Board of Ed survey, the kids assessment, is that, you know, 1 in 4 to 1 in 6 children are not ready for kindergarten. Ready for kindergarten is a pretty objective term, or subjective term. What is readiness? You know, can they separate from you? Can they transition into different activities? Can they manage their frustrations? And those are things that we can still be working on. There is a lot of learning that can go on in homes. Scavenger hunts for things that start with a particular letter, counting how many windows are in the house, which also gets them up and moving. Scavenger hunts for things of color, helping them cook with you, measuring ingredients or math activities. There's so much that we as parents can do in home with our little ones and with our older ones that can help them continue to progress through this time.
I love that so much. Yes, on all of those pieces. And before we move on, I want to just briefly recap in Spanish. I won't say it all, but I want to do the summary. La pregunta fue, ¿cuánta gracia se puede dar a nuestros padres, a nuestros hijos durante la pandemia? Normalmente hay hitos que nuestros hijos tienen que, ¿cómo se dice?, tocar a cada año, a cada mes, mientras que ellos están pequeños y hasta cuando se, ¿cómo se dice? Sit loudly, I'm gonna phone it in with this one. Los hitos son cuántas palabras tienen que decir para cuando llegan a la edad de 2 años, si están caminando, cómo se deberían de sentir. Hay programas y hay cosas que dicen, tu hijo, tu hija deberían de estar en este nivel, en este tiempo. Pero mucho de lo que la doctora González acaba de decir y también Tracy acaba de decir, se tiene que dar gracia durante ese tiempo. Nuestros hijos y nuestras familias están navegando muchas cosas al mismo tiempo. So hay oportunidad de nosotros como padres ayudar a nuestros hijos con cosas pequeñas en la casa. Por ejemplo, Tracy acaba de decir, si tu hijo no está contando hasta el número 10, puedes hacer cosas pequeñas en la casa para ayudarlo a él o a ella. Hay que ponerlo a contar las ventanas. Hay que ponerlo a describir los colores que él ve en la casa. Algo que yo he hecho con mi hijo, cuando es tiempo de doblar la ropa, yo lo pongo ok, Luis, es tiempo de buscar los calcetines que son tuyos. So busca tus calcetines, ponlos en tu área y ¿cuántos calcetines tienes? So hay que tratar de pensar un poco diferente y también es cosa de que no están solos nuestros padres, queremos dejarles saber, hay recursos para ellos, como la doctora Weiss dijo, puedes ponerte en contacto con tu doctor, puedes ponerte en contacto con el maestro o la maestra. Estamos aquí para ayudar a toda nuestra comunidad a seguir moviéndonos a un lugar mejor mental, físico durante esta pandemia.
I wanted to add one more thing, and I think it's important to remember that this is not what homeschooling looks like. This could not be further from what homeschooling looks like. This is crisis learning. It's a little better than it was in the spring, but this is, homeschooling parents have entire curriculums and resources, and they plan it that way to be child-led. This is crisis learning, and the teachers are doing the very best that they can. with very limited resources and opportunities, because parents are also working full time. They're not there to be educating their children.
Mhm.
So take advantage of the resources in the community. Berwyn Library is posting read alouds. The zoo is doing virtual tours. Museums are doing virtual tours. And yes, it is far too much screen time, but it still gives us access to services. Even if you just Google read alouds in English or in Spanish, you'll come up with a book that will be read to your child, and you can follow along with it.
Mhm. Thank you, Tracy. That's very helpful.
Can I mention one other thing?
Mhm.
Everybody was talking about grace, and I think we forget about our teachers. And I think we have to have some grace for our educators as well. They are doing such an outstanding job. And it is so difficult having to transition. You know, this is crisis or pandemic learning. It was different in the spring, as alluded to, than it is now. But still, some people are teaching totally remotely. Some people are having to adapt to teaching both in person and on a screen at the same time, and trying to deal with children with different learning abilities. So I think we have to have some grace for our educators as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I want to make sure we have enough time for Jackie and for Mike, because I want to make sure that we're also thinking about our families have children of all ages. And so when we, Jackie and Mike, you both work more with adolescents. And so when we think about kind of the loss and the grief that's gone on in particularly with adolescents, what are some of the what are some ways that we could encourage our families and like our adolescents to stay connected even while they're apart is one of the questions. But then also, how do I help my child be more resilient during this tough time when, as a parent, I may be struggling? So I'm gonna start with you, Jackie, first, and then if Mike, you could jump in.
Sure. Thank you. Those are really good questions. So I think in some ways, we are not that different from our adolescent children in ways that we can connect with one another, right? So first of all, I want to point out kids are connecting, right? Most kids are connecting. It might look differently than we like. It involves a lot of screen time. It involves video games. It involves a lot of tech, but they are connecting. I think with that, we need to be really cognizant that we are monitoring that. And like what Dr. Wise said, and lots of people before me have said about just paying attention to the amount of screen time, the type of connections that people and our children are having with other individuals, right? So it's a whole new world, and we really need to, as parents, really pay attention to that. I think that, there are lots of ways to get connected outside. If you have a little bonfire pit in your backyard, your teenager could have a friend over, you sit around it, they wear masks, they sit outside and talk, like encourage that kind of stuff. My husband took our boys on the troll hunt out in the suburbs, right? That's something that could be done. Cicero has an ice skating rink that's really, really cheap. Those are different ways that our kids can connect with people in person in a safe way. I think it's also important. There are organizations like Youth Crossroads, the schools. There's lots of organizations that have had to pivot so to help kids connect in groups. And they're doing a lot of stuff on the internet, but they're also doing like volunteer opportunities. I know our kids at Youth Crossroads did a Martin Luther King kind of community give back where they collected different clothing and food and flowers and bath bombs and all this kind of stuff. And people came, the teenagers were involved in the distribution of that. So look into different organizations and schools about what their youth programs are doing, because they are doing stuff in this time. And I think that, for so many of us, we think the world has shut down, but really it hasn't shut down. We've just pivoted, we're doing things differently. And then when it comes to resiliency, I think it's really important for us to, again, what Dr. Wise said, exercise is hugely important. Routines is really important. Our kids are looking for connection. And I think as parents, this is an opportunity for us to be the people that our kids are connecting with. So think about how differently you can do things in your home. Maybe you start playing chess with your kid. Maybe you start cooking with your child. Maybe you start having a family, you know, watch time at night so that you guys are spending time together. I think this absence of face-to-face contact with other people really gives us the opportunity as parents to kind of step into that role. And that's a privilege. That's an honor that we get to be those people for our kids. So I think that stuff's really important.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, and I think, you know, we've encouraged parents to sit with the kids while they play the video games to like learn what they like and what that world is like for them. And even if we have no interest or like about it, but that again, I think, you know, our children continue to want to be connected to us. And so if we could just, you know, ask them about their different avatars and who they're playing and what does it mean to be in this world and then in these games. And so those are just ways to continue to connect with, and again, in this day, you know, in this, during the pandemic, that's more important than ever. So, so Mike, I would like to ask you the same question and to be thinking about what are the signs that we should be looking for, right? Because so many times our kiddos don't just come out and say when something is wrong. So as parents, in addition to you know, kind of playing many roles, we're also detectives, right? We always have to kind of be looking for those signs and kind of interpreting what they're trying to tell us. And so what have you noticed in the world of telehealth and in this world that we've pivoted to? What are the signs that we should be paying attention when kids are not kind of coming out and saying that something's wrong?
Yeah, definitely. We've had to pivot and force ourselves to find out what sticks, right? In a matter of providing services for youth. I'm a youth worker and have been doing this for some time now. And I want to go back to something that Dr. Weiss had mentioned, where she had a patient coming in with a twisted ankle, and you ask a certain question and they start bawling, right? So it boils down to relationship. Learning how to ask questions or what questions to ask. There's something called motivational interviewing, right? And then we have different tools and different instruments that we can practice to answer questions or ask questions and have these type of questions that lead to other things and help them navigate this process of trying to think through their emotions, right? Because they might not have those tools. And providing parents with some of that same training, right? I think some of our where we may lack is providing these services and to parents directly, but we want to try to surround the youth with counseling services, right? Where we have some counselors on staff that try to work with parents directly. But I think what we're trying to do now is we do a lot of remote virtual stuff. And what we've seen with some of our programs is parents are interested, right? You've mentioned parents sitting down with their youth. Parents are kind of in the background and they want to participate too, right? So how can we find ways to incorporate not just the youth themselves, but their parents so they can feel more comfortable being in that setting? But again, a relationship, right? We might not have all the time to build relationship, but providing a safe space where youth can express themselves, right, in a way that they know how to, and providing them tools to be able to express themselves verbally, right? And again, those signs might be physical. If you know what your child is like normally, right, what kind of personality they have, you're definitely going to see a change in attitude or just their physical body, right? Their shoulders are down, their face is down. So it's a matter of learning how to ask those questions, navigating, learning. Someone mentioned, what does the avatar mean, right? I mean, I've been trying to do some, I've been picking up video games now. I was lacking in that skill set for the past 10 years, but I've started to navigate that process now and speaking to these youth at the same time and asking those type of questions, right? What kind of video games And parents have to know what kind of video games their children are playing, right? I'm not a parent, but I try to see these youth as one of my children, right? And treat them as one of my own. So yeah, it boils down to relationship, right? And having conversations that I try to have conversations that I know my youth aren't having, right? Some of some experiences that they're going through, I went through. I grew up in this neighborhood. I'm of Mexican heritage, right? So I understand the culture. Some of our parents might not have the opportunity of working remotely, right? So our programs, our building was offering e-learning support, right? Some of the youth were coming in and we were providing those spaces. Again, socialization was brought up earlier. It's a very tricky time to figure out, but again, we're learning as we go. So hopefully I answered some of those questions, right?
Yeah, can I just add one more thing? Just to Tracy's point, like we are in a pandemic still, right? We are still in crisis mode. And so when we think about our kids and their emotional responses to the world, like them being sad, them being disappointed, them being angry, these are totally normal responses to the world that they're living in. And so I want to, you know, as a counselor, you know, we do diagnosis and all that kind of stuff. I want to make sure that we're not whatever that word is, pathologist, I can't even say it, sorry, it's Saturday, I'm not supposed to say big words. But these are not unhealthy responses necessarily, right? These are normal responses to a stressful world. They are experiencing loss. You know, they maybe have looked forward to their 8th grade year for a long time, or graduation, or prom, or, you know, playing sports to get them into college. So I think it's important that we recognize that there's a lot of loss outside of kind of death of loved ones and stuff like that. And so what you may be seeing as a parent is kind of a normal response. And so what you do, you don't leave it alone. You still kind of meet them where they're at, provide support. And there's all different kinds of support. And I know Erica's going to share a bunch of resources in the community that people can turn to. But I just want to, again, grace is important, and give your kids grace for what they're experiencing and navigating during this time.
Thank you, Mike and Jackie. Para repetir brevemente en español, si puedo hacerlo, la pregunta fue, ¿cómo es que podemos asegurarnos que nuestros hijos sean más resilientes? Mike,
Yes.
resilientes, it's that L and the E. So, ¿cómo podemos ayudarlos a que algo que dice mi mamá, ponte las pilas, hay que seguirle, no hay tiempo de sentarse, podemos hacerlo. No importa qué motivadora sea mi mamá o seamos nosotros como padres, es importante de recordarse que durante este tiempo estamos en una crisis todavía, estamos en una pandemia. Sí, tenemos que dejar a que nuestros hijos estén tristes. Tenemos que dejar de que ellos se sientan como se sienten, pero es importante que nosotros como padres tomemos en cuenta cómo se sienten. Hacer esas preguntas de ver, oh, no estás comiendo, Luis, no es que porque no tienes hambre, es que porque algo está pasando, te sientes de una manera. Es importante de nosotros como padres, o si no somos padres, como tío, tía, amigo que tiene a un joven que queremos, de nosotros ponernos a pensar de esas cosas. Algo que Mike dijo, a él no le gusta, no que no le guste, pero él no trabajaba o usaba juegos video game, pero si eso es una manera de poder conectar con un joven, de poder hablar y conocer cómo es que se están sintiendo, es importante de tomar esos pasos. Algo que siempre se ha dicho es de que tenemos que tener relaciones con nuestros jóvenes que sean auténticas. No es cosa de nada más preguntarles, ¿Quieres comer? ¿Tienes hambre? ¿Tienes zapatos? Perfecto, estás bien. Tenemos también que asegurarnos, ¿te sientes bien? ¿Estás bien? Tú puedes venir conmigo y si no te sientes que puedes venir conmigo, háblale al tío, háblale a la prima. Está bien si quieres hablar con alguna otra persona. Y eso es el punto de nuestras conversaciones. Las personas que tenemos hoy aquí son de varias áreas de especialidad, pero el punto es de que yo siempre he dicho, no hay cosa que, hay muchas personas que quieren ayudar a mi hijo o a mi hija. Eso es cosa buena, es cosa perfecta. Hay recursos para familias de cada tamaño, edad, lenguaje, y eso es el punto por qué estamos teniendo esas conversaciones.
I
I
wanted
think
to add
also,
to, go ahead.
oh, I think Erica, what you're saying too, it's important to keep in mind to make space for those feelings too. To make space for that sadness and not jump to fix it. Sometimes our children will say, I feel sad. And as parents, as grown-ups, we might want to say, well, what can I help? Don't worry, it's going to be okay. No, it's going to be all right. And it's okay to acknowledge and say, you know what? It is really sad that we can't see grandma. It is really sad we can't see our friends, and to make space and allow for that feeling of sadness, because we don't want to shame the children out of the sadness, because what we do, and especially with adolescents, then we close off that opportunity for communication. I also want to just jump in and say one of my big pieces of advice for I was going to say for parents, but really for anyone, we're talking a lot about accessing mental health services. I always compare things to cars with this. So when we have a car and we hear a funny noise, we usually take it to a mechanic. We don't hear a funny noise and wait for it to get louder until it crashes and the wheels fall off in the middle of the expressway. We want to do the same with our mental health. If we hear a funny noise, if we start to feel a little bump while we're driving, we hear something, we feel something, we want to get help. We don't want to wait for our mental health to crash when we need it to be working the best. And so we want to reach out, we want to ask for help. I remember when I was in grad school, I went and saw a therapist and I said, I feel a little anxious, but I don't know if I feel anxious enough to be here. Is it okay that I'm here? And my therapist laughed and said, just the fact that you're asking, are you anxious enough to be here, tells me that you're anxious enough to be here. We don't have to wait to break down to ask for help. Even if we're fine. I always tell my kids, my adolescents, that therapy is not for people who have problems. Therapy is for people who have goals. And our goal is mental well-being. So if you are someone who wants mental well-being, who has goals, then you are someone who is right for therapy.
That is the best line.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome.
I also wanted to acknowledge real fast that what Jackie said about the kids having legitimate losses that are not based in grief, in the death of someone, the losses of experiences that they've looked forward to, that goes for the parents too. I can be very grateful that my family is healthy. My son graduated college in May on a video screen. We canceled flights, we canceled hotel rooms. And it was only 2 months into, who knew it would be another year later, right? But everything got wiped out. There is legitimate loss there, and it's okay for the adults and the parents to be feeling it and to say to the kids, yeah, it just stinks. There's no justification. There's no, oh, we'll make it better. It's gone, right? I mean, he's moved on. He got a job, but that piece he won't get back. And so many kids lost those major milestones event, especially in our communities where it might be the first child to graduate high school or the first college graduate. Those are big losses and they're life cycle events, and it's okay, but it's also an opportunity to think outside the box on how we can acknowledge it, how we can celebrate it. We did a Zoom party. Everybody mailed cards. They were waiting for him when he came back home. You know, there are things that we can do. How many driveway parties and birthday parades did we see this year? So we can still make the things special and acknowledge that there's loss and still be grateful that it wasn't something more tragic and worse.
Can I segue onto what you said for just a second? Well, actually, what many people have said, which is that many of these emotions that these kids and the parents are feeling are normal. I think we just have to recognize.
Did she freeze? Dr. Weiss, you left us. It's a cliffhanger. You froze, Dr. Weiss.
I'm sorry, I think my internet's goofy. What I wanted to say is I think, you know, as many people have said, these emotions are normal that the parents and the children are all feeling. We just, as professionals who work with children and for the parents of these children or siblings of these children, to recognize when something is exaggerated outside of perhaps the range of normal. And that is, you know, a red flag that the child's suffering and or parent in that case, and might need some additional support. And then to segue on what you were talking about with development, I just want to stress that development's a continuum, and you know, all the people who work here know that. So, I mean, as an example, a child can be normal who walks at 9 months, and a child can be normal who walks at 12 months, and a child can be normal who walks at 15 months. All of that is normal. So just because your brother's cousin's kid is walking 2 months before yours, it doesn't mean that your child is abnormal. So discuss this with, you know, you can look on the CDC developmental milestone app. You can ask your pediatrician or family physician to do an ages and stages questionnaire with your child, which most physicians have access to, and they can give you some better guidance with regard to that.
Yeah, and I think that, you know, just to close out with a couple of themes, Erica, is that certainly that we want to continue to provide space for parents and youth, and thinking about, you know, our health is mental health is part of our health, right? And so, you know, how you've all mentioned that it is much, it's much worth our investment in prevention and being, you know, kind of, asking those questions early on than to wait till something becomes more of a serious chronic issue. And so looking at, you know, right on and what you said, Dr. Gonzalez, that if we look at it as, you know, what are the goals that we need to stay healthy mentally and physically, right? And treating our bodies as a whole person. I also think, you know, what Mike was talking about the saying about how can we be the person we wish we had when we were growing up, and that, you know, so many times it is about those relationships, and that regardless of our titles and our experiences and our roles in our agencies, that at the end of the day, if we can connect with a parent, or if we could connect with a child, that usually has the biggest influence on their lives, right? And that's what teachers do, right? So going back to teachers and the incredible endurance that they've had to take on this year. And so I know, Erica, that you are probably running out of time, and I know you probably have some questions so I don't know how you want to navigate the
Sure.
closing of this.
Sure. Yeah. So we went a little bit over, so I apologize, but this is great conversation. You know what I mean? I think what I hope this is doing to parents is like, okay, I can talk to my neighbor. It's okay to feel a certain way. There's actually a good movie, and I always forget it, but I'll have to share it. But it's a character named Sadness. What's it called? I'll have to share it. But it's the difference.
Inside Out.
Inside Out, yes. The movie is called Inside Out, and every character has a feeling that's what their character is. And if sadness is always sad, you can't make them happy because they're sad. They're always going to be sad. That's what they are. And it's okay for them to do that. And sadness can interact with the other emotions, but it's okay to recognize that. So I'll have to share that as well as far as like a good movie to think about. But I do have questions that I do want to ask, because so we have families that are beginning to transition into hybrid, and there's without a doubt a fear of, you know, and very valid fear from adults to children, the teachers. Dr. Weiss, you mentioned the teachers. Without a doubt, our teachers are amazing navigators for our families. How do we help ease, you know, this idea that our children, if they've been home this whole time, that they're going to return back to the classroom. Is my child going to get COVID? What are the signs? They've been home this whole time. Can my child get COVID? Should I be scared? When is the vaccination? It's a slew of questions, but the top is, how can my child transition into being back into the classroom? So Dr. Weiss, if you can summarize that in like a breath, I'm just kidding, but like, how do we?
I think that realize that these children will do fine when they go back to school, and we have to have confidence in our children. They're resilient, they're plastic, they change, they're good at that. That's intrinsic in being a child. They're much better at it than we are. The parents are probably going to be more nervous. I mean, sure, we'll see some separation anxiety. I think for the parents watching this, you have to know that most children who get COVID are not very sick. That's a blessing. Unfortunately, they can sometimes transmit it to relatives and grandmas and grandpas and, elderly folks that can become more ill with COVID. But I think,
oh, no, every time the punchline comes in.
I think it's also important to remember that when you go back to hybrid, we need to prepare the kids. It's not going to look like school was in March before with a shutdown. They're not going to be running around and going to stations with their friends. It's going to be a different environment. Hand washing is going to be a regular part of the day. Masks are a regular part of the day. And it's not going to be the freedom in the classroom and in the school that it was. It looks very differently right now.
And, Tracy, in your world of early childhood, we have parents that may be getting ready to go back to work or need to find childcare. And you and I talk so much about, I love our 0 to 5 programs that I wish that I could shout from the mountaintops that we have, amazing programs. And our parents, whether it's a financial issue or the ability that they're just not sure, about enrolling their children into these preschool programs. Can you talk about that?
I can.
What does that look like?
The Children's Center of Cicero Berwyn has 9 different sites and 13 different programs, predominantly with low-income families. Many of our families qualify for free services, whether it's a half-day program, a full-day program, or a home visiting program, which again is now virtual. And we do all those screenings that Dr. Weiss talked about. We do, and so many other programs. I don't want to say just the Children's Center does it, but speaking for our agency, we do the ages and stages. We make early intervention referrals. We give parents materials and developmental information to help them, but also so they can work and be out of the home and the children are safe. Our preschoolers have done the most phenomenal job with their hand washing and their mask wearing. And I know that a lot of the hesitation with parents is, oh my God, he's 3, he's never gonna wear a mask. They correct us. If it falls down below a nose, they correct each other. They compliment each other. Wow, I like your Batman mask. They wash their hands all the time. We have a little buzzer by the sink, and you hit it when you start washing your hands, and then it buzzes when the 30 seconds or the 20 seconds is over. They have a song to sing, and it helps them with those transitions from activities. There are 2 children at a table versus 6 children at a table. We're taking all of those steps. So childcare is a safe place. DCFS has really been on top of us. Our numbers are down. We're not keeping the same amount of children in a classroom. Childcare is a safe place right now. And preschool classrooms in childcare agencies, I don't know, schools are different because they're on hybrid, but preschool classrooms are safe places right now. And there are openings and we are doing enrollment.
Great. And I'll share that with any information that you send me, Tracy. And then for Mike and Jackie, and maybe this is why my nephew who's 16 is like rolls his eyes when I'm like, is it cool to be safe, RJ? Like, so how do you encourage, that social distancing, with our teens? How do we, I talked to my nephew, he's wonderful, but the conversation of like, oh, RJ, are you really hanging out with your friends? It's like, we're playing football, it's outside, it's fine. I'm like, everybody's wearing a mask. So what happens, with older children, that are listening and are processing these pieces? How can we reinforce that to make it cool to be safe?
Yeah, I think those friendly reminders, right, of put your mask up, right, and wear it correctly. But being that model, right, I think as leaders in our community, we can be that model and be that example, because we need to find people that are cool to kind of show that model too, right?
Yeah.
And as leaders, this is the time to step up and hold each other accountable, right? I think we sometimes we may slip up, right? And our youth are holding us accountable, as was previously mentioned. Kids are resilient. Kids can hold you accountable if we teach them how to, right? And it's just that's just something that comes naturally as a child. I think the resiliency to overcome, to adapt. I think of there's a quote from a Clint Eastwood movie: we have to adapt, adjust, and overcome, right? And that's what we need to do right now. Um, but yeah, because keep those reminders, right, and see what sticks. We're starting to have some in-person programming, right? More smaller groups. We do a lot of one-on-one stuff through mentoring, right? Through sports specifically, and that's tough. That's tough because you see the youth that are out there at the park, right? No mask, no social distancing. But what can we do to kind of come alongside them and say, hey, this is the reason why we're doing this, right? We want to protect our grandmothers. We want to protect our parents, right? That are older, that are not as they're more susceptible to becoming sick, right? So how can we protect them and hold each other accountable?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think kids, adolescents, their prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for decision making, is not fully developed, right? But they're also not second graders that will just say, you can just say, hey, do this because I said so, which doesn't always work with my kids either. But right, and so we need to Mike's point, we need to give them reason. We need to tell them these are the consequences, or the potential consequences if you're not responsible, right? And so help them sort of buy into mask wearing as well, and hold them accountable, right? There's, I want you to spend time with your friends or friend in the backyard. And if you can't follow this rule, then we're not going to be able to do that. And so I think that as an agency, we've had to do that, right? We've had to say, hey, if you can't be responsible out of the safety of all the other people here, like you can't be in program today unless you're going to wear your mask, and then follow through with that. That's really hard for us, I think, because we're naturally, I don't know, very warm, loving, kind people, and sometimes that can be difficult. But what that does is that communicates, hey, we're serious. And one thing I really like is this is not about a rule. This is about the love for the people around you, right? So if you really care and you really love the people around you, then you're going to be responsible. And frankly, as adults, we're the worst, right? We're the ones complaining about the masks. We're the ones complaining about all of this stuff. So if we model it, if we model a positive attitude, our kids will be picking up on that.
Awesome.
I would add too that whenever we can offer choices, like you could either go outside and do this with your mask, or you could do, that's always, I feel like, goes further than we think. And the fact that through this whole process, we're teaching empathy, right? It's all about, again, everybody's mentioned that it's this is bigger than ourselves, right? And so how do we really then continue to foster and nurture this next generation of folks who really have, not only survived but thrived through the pandemic, and with the goal of the empathy of how to care and love others beyond ourselves.
There's a question that came through that I'd like to share. I read that 70% of children that died of COVID were Black, Latinx, and Native American. What advocacy is being done on behalf of these groups? So, that's, not to say that that's a question beyond what we're capable here, but, looking at the data, and I'm not a public policy, expert by any means, but we know the information that's coming out in terms of what populations and what groups are being mostly affected, by COVID-19. And this is, a valid question, what support or what advocacy. I don't know who to bring this question to. Your answer doesn't have to be perfect, but what do we do? How do we build some advocacy or support? Sitlali?
That's something that I was really looking at, especially in the beginning, because I know that one of the communities that was hardest hit was Little Village, which is where I work, and I know one of the other panelists as well. And I know that one of the big things was just socioeconomic, and a lot of our brown communities, Black and brown communities, do tend to work more within service industries. So they are more of the essential workers working within the grocery stores, more of the workers that are out there. I think another of the big things, especially within the Latino communities, is that there's a lot of multi-generational families. So we do have a lot of the grandpas who are higher risk living in the households within where the parents maybe are working out in factories, working in grocery stores. And then there's the teenagers that are out in the park, not social distancing, not wearing the mask. And so there's a lot of that higher risk. As far as what we can do, I'm not exactly sure. I think that a big thing would be to really advocate more, provide more education. I know a lot of the families that I've talked to are really hesitant to get vaccines. I think that a lot of the families that I've spoken to are really afraid about what the vaccine means. There's a lot of misinformation out there about what's in it. So I think one of the really big things will be to provide more information about what it is and what it's not, as well as more access, more information, I think, in Spanish, more information that's not necessarily only provided online. My parents don't know how to register online. I've been registering that for them, but not everybody has that. Not everybody has internet access. Not everybody knows how to register online, how to follow up with a link. So I think more information about how to do these things in ways that people can actually access will be really, really useful.
And I'll say, Sitlali, next week we will be hosting 2 doctors that will be joining us to discuss vaccination. And both are professionals one works in a federally certified, I don't know how I'm using the word.
FQHC, Federally Qualified Health Center.
Jinx. Who works with undocumented, who works with our Black and brown communities, because not only is it the misinformation about what the vaccine is or isn't and what's going to happen, the fear, but there's also the piece, what happens to individuals that are going through citizenship? Is signing up for the vaccine considered,
public charge?
Tracy,
does it work against public charge?
Exactly. So that's something that I don't know the answer to that. And, but it's a valid question. But you know what I mean? So there's that fear. If people fear walking into a building because automatically they think it's going to be a strike against them, that goes back to, misinformation or having these real conversations. And that's what I'm hoping, or not I'm hoping, that's what we're going to have next week about the vaccination. Where can I get information? I just saw WBZ shared an awesome article. Anna, we were texting about it, that I think it's community navigators that
promotoras de salud.
Yes, promoters of health that are at the laundromats and are sharing information about vaccination, are sharing information, and that is a beautiful thing. My biggest thing has been outreach needs to happen in the communities with our people. Sitlali, it cannot happen online, you know what I mean, with a link. I think that's a great step, but I think it also needs to go and be in the community where our people are, and I mean that across the board, in our schools, in the laundromat, if that's where it has to be, but we have to meet people where they are. Dr. Weiss, I think you were going to say something.
Yeah. I was going to say, I think we need to be role models for our community. And I see a lot of vaccine hesitancy about regular childhood vaccinations as well as the COVID vaccine. And I really try and bring this up at every visit. What questions do you have? How can I help you? I think sometimes hearing not only from your own doctor, but having a public face and showing pictures of your professionals having received their vaccines or talking to them about what your experience was. Yes, my arm hurt a little bit, but it was no different than a flu shot, or I had a little mild headache and it went away and I didn't even need Tylenol. You know, I mean, that sort of thing. But I also think they need to hear from people who speak the language, who they respect. I've heard stories of, you know, people hearing it from, you know, physicians of color, other sorts of things in their community that may have, you know, resonate more. You know, I don't, you know, I speak a minimal amount of Spanish. I don't speak a lot of Spanish. I understand. But the thing is, I think the more places that they hear about the positive roles of the vaccine, and life is all about risks and benefits. And we have to look at what are the risks of taking the vaccine versus the risk of me, you know, getting COVID. And at my age, getting COVID, there's a higher risk. But more importantly, if your child gets COVID and then brings it home to, in a multi-generational home, grandma, grandpa, great aunt, great uncle, whoever lives in the family, that's going to be worse. And so I think we have to realize we're in this for community. I didn't get the vaccine for myself. I got it for my family, my patients, and most importantly for my community, because we all have to be in this together.
Yeah, and I think there'll be continued, there's a lot of different efforts going on about vaccine confidence and what does that mean per community and culture. And so it's not, like you're saying, not just translating the literature, the information that's out there, but what's really the concern and the fear in the communities, and then how do we address that as professionals, right? Because I think that we need our trusted community leaders, our community champions, to also be the voice, you know, in the community, because I think, again, they're going to trust their comadres and their neighbors sometimes more than they're going to even trust us. So we really, the outreach and the education. So to your point, there's a lot of efforts going on in Cicero and Berwyn to really, you know, address that, because we do know that there is hesitation, and we want to get the most culturally appropriate information out there as soon as possible as the phases are rolling out. So thank you for bringing that up.
Perfect. Perfect. So I will close this out. We went a little bit over our time, but if there are any closing remarks, I would like to invite everybody that's watching or tell a friend. We are committed, people that are watching, you know, to sharing information about the vaccine and what does that mean for our community. And next week, Saturday, from 8:30 to 9:30, I have a feeling it's going to be from 8:30 to like 10. Discussing, you know, what does it mean what does the vaccine mean? Where do I sign up, or what are the stages? Because I know Monday is a different stage of who can get vaccinated. But the other piece too, with both doctors that'll be on, we'll talk about preventative care. What does that even mean outside during COVID, but even before COVID? Does preventative care, you know, mean something in our community? When Fabiola and Anna were on last week, we talked about, you know, certain indicators in our community. And for Berwyn in particular, there are studies of what is the survey that occurred that shared in our community, diabetes, high blood pressure, many of these health conditions that could be prevented if we take extra steps, you know, in our care. So we can talk all day, but for that, I invite you next week, 8:30 to 9:30. Thank you, everybody, for being on the call today. Thank you so much for your time, and I look forward to connecting with you all in another capacity. I'm going to shut off our live Facebook feed. Should our presenters want to stay back and just say our thank yous and close out. So let me do what I have to do on my end to close this out. And then stop.